What's up, people, and welcome to part 3 in our discussion regarding Alita Battle Angel and the possible story, or where the story may go in possible sequels based upon the current movie, the current source material, as well as the information that has been discussed in the comment section in our previous videos, as well as information that has been provided to the public. And I wanted to make part 3 revolve around Motorball, since as we know in the source material, the next chapters beyond this point is the Motorball arc, as well as the fact that there was a significant amount of Motorball in the movie, including the ending, which indicated that there will be some possibility of Motorball coming up in potential future sequels. Now, what I wanted to discuss is that there are, discussions with regards to how much Motorball may come up in future movies, and I did want to go over that here, as well as discuss some of the really strong points that I have with regards to Motorball, why I value the Motorball arc so much. Now, before I begin, I do want to inform people that the creator of Battle Angel Lead Our Gunmu, Mr. Yukito Kishiro, does have a YouTube channel. I mean, it's not a large one. It only has like 5 videos in there. But I will leave a link to one of the videos, the movie opening in the Los Angeles area, his experience there. And I left my, comment, my congratulations comment to him in that video. But you may want to look at his channel. He does have several videos on the different locations in which the movie opened. And depending upon where you are, if you wanted to, you could leave a word of thanks, good tidings, best wishes, whatever, with regards to his source material, I've enjoyed comic for a really long time, and I did enjoy leaving that comment with him. Now, of course, I've already watched the movie now 5 times, and so I am very glad that this movie finally came out. Okay, so diving into Motorball. I did want to leave at least one video with regards to the discussions of Motorball. The reason for that is, first of all, I really like the Motorball arc in the story. And of course, it seems like the audience for the movie has really enjoyed the action from the Motorball sequences in the movie. However, the one thing that I do find with regards to this part of the story, in the entire Battle Angel Alita storyline, as well as in the movie Alita Battle Angel, is that Motorball feels like an enigma. It just feels like a separate story that's a little bit different from the rest of the Battle Angel Alita. Cloak and dagger, a lot of gun violence, fighting violence, and various things. This part just feels like a sports drama, right? I mean, it felt like that in the comic book especially. And that one arc just felt a little bit out of place from everything else. And even in the movie, as much as it's been shortened, it just feels like a different world from everything else that you see in Scrapyard City. All of a sudden, this Motorball comes up. And I know a lot of commenters have, or reviewers have said, why is this sports thing in this entire other thing, rather than going into the other parts of the story, such as Nova's background, Zalem's background. You have all of that thing going on, and yet the movie spends a lot of time on Motorball. In addition, there is quite a bit of discussion going on, and I do agree with many of the commenters who left comments here. I do also feel that Motorball will not be the full movie in the next sequel, but only will be one part of the next movie, and that is because there is just so much source material to cover. And from what I hear, the movie series or the sequel series may end up being a trilogy, so there's only 3 movies to cover a lot of source material. And if you spend one full movie on Motorball, that may kind of be wasted space. So I did want to go into a lot of this discussion here because I do find a lot of value in the Motorball arc, which I wanted to talk about. However, my feeling with regards to why I think it's a good idea for the producers to not spend a lot of focus on Motorball, but go to some of the other greater arcs, such as the Japan arc or the Toon/Barjack arc, or even, something even further like the Zalem arc, in the final parts of the first original series. But in any case, before I start again, I do want to give my default spoiler review, since I will be going into a lot of the information with regards to what happens in Motorball beyond what you see in the movie. If you don't want to be spoiled with regards to the possible stories that may come up in future sequels of the movie, based upon the things that you see in the source material, then I would suggest that you turn off this video at this point. However, if you do want to hear about some of what I feel is of value and why I feel the Motorball arc is such a unique arc within the entire Battle Angel Alita storyline, then please continue. Anyway, I did want to give my standard default spoiler alert. So, as we know from the source material, Motorball is one of the two major professional sports franchises that exists in Iron City. The other one being the Gladiator games, which you don't see in the movie nor the anime, but you do see in the comic. And just like back in historical Rome with the Colosseum, these ultra-violent sports shows are provided to make sure that the citizens of Iron City focus their attention to these sports, and by doing so, they would avoid focusing any of their aggression towards Zalem. Now, the other thing with regards to the source material is we do know that Vector owns the Gladiator games. However, in the comic, it's never mentioned that Vector owns the Motorball games. However, considering how powerful Vector is, and considering he is associated with a lot of the sports franchises, including the Gladiator games, and later on, as we know in Last Order, he does own the rights to televise the Zot Championship, the zenith of all things fighting championship that occurs in Jeru, that he is very well connected to the majority of the sports industry. And so it's not really surprising if he would also be the owner of the Motorball franchise. Now, for those of you who haven't read Last Order or, the other chapters in the comic, what I just mentioned does give a spoiler with regards to Vector if he does own the rights and televises the Zenith of All Things Championship. Then, of course, for the people who watched the movie but never read the comic, you start understanding in the comic, Vector isn't dead. And what I'm hoping for is in the movie, the next movie, it turns out that Vector somehow survived and is in a wheelchair just as he is in the comic book. That what Alita did to him was brutal enough that he will no longer be able to use his legs. But due to the modern technology and modern medicine of that era, he's able to somehow recover. And the reason I want that is, first of all, I would like to see more of Mahershala Ali. And hopefully people will stop saying, it's a waste of a good actor. And the other one is I would like to see the various, the characteristics of Vector. He was extremely one-dimensional in the first movie. As you know, as things go on in the future, things actually show his other side, the more humane side of Vector. And it may be a little bit hard for the moviegoers to accept that because of the fact that he was represented as being so evil rather than the multifaceted persona that he had in the comic, even during chapters 1 to 4. However, it would be interesting to see if Vector somehow has kind of a redemption sort of situation where it takes a while, right? He's still not the really benevolent character, and he never will be. But it'll take a while for him to go from having a grudge to eventually getting to the point of accepting the fact that, he is partially or quite a bit responsible for a lot of the situation that he came into. And that would be not bad because of the fact that, of course, a lot of the heart of Battle Angel Alita, the source material, is all about karma, about the responsibilities of each individual's actions and the results that occur from that. Whether you are, Alita, whether you're Ido, or you're Vector, it just basically is kind of a lesson in life in terms of some of the things that occur that eventually will kind of steer the character towards a new direction. And whether the character progression is positive or negative, you could see the results of that character change based upon the things that happen in the story. And because of that, that's another reason why I like Battle Angel Alita. First of all, it's not one-dimensional. You do see a lot of character progression in a lot of people. However, the character progression, unlike a lot of shonen mangas, is not always positive. People may often go into the other direction, as you saw in Hugo, where later on, in the beginning, you think he's actually a good character. And at least the movie, in the manga, he was more a jerk. But at least in the movie, you think that he's a good character. And eventually, you realize that there is a darker side to him. There are things that actually go towards the negative. And that's something that I do want to talk about here, because that is one of the things that you see happen to Alita in the beginning parts of the Motorball arc. Now, when I see Motorball, or when I started reading Motorball, I started thinking about two specific movies. Especially recently, after watching Alita Battle Angel as well, I started thinking Motorball can be well represented by two specific movies. Now, the first one is obvious, and this is the one that a lot of people have commented on, which is Rollerball, right? And I'm not talking about the most recent remake of Rollerball. I'm talking about the 1970 whatever original Rollerball movie that starred James Caan. And if you've never seen it, I would suggest that you look at it. It is dated, and a lot of the things that you see is the filming style of that era. However, the thing I liked about Rollerball is it was a brutal, again, action sport that was there to kind of feed the hunger of the people of that era, which were somewhat privileged and kind of in a utopian society. So they needed to get their aggression out. And Rollerball was one of the nice ways of doing it. And what was interesting is, of course, the heroes or the sports, the champions of the rollerball industry were considered idols, but at the same time, as much as society idolized them, they expected that these idols will eventually go out and basically kill each other in the arena. And that was the unusual thing about it, and that's something that you also see in the source material, and hopefully what you'll see in the movie, is that, as you can see, when they were cheering these people on as they were being destroyed, this is not our hero and we hope they do well sort of thing. They basically are waiting to see destruction, violence, and to some extent, hopefully, death. And so it's a very kind of dark sort of sport. And of course, just like Rollerball was to, or James Caan was to Rollerball in that movie, Alita Battle Angel is talking about somebody who gets thrown into that environment and has to cope with basically, supporting that environment while basically trying to maintain their humanity. And so that was something that I found to be quite similar between the two storylines. However, as I continued to read or reread the Motorball arc and thought about it recently as while watching Alita Battle Angel and talking to some people, I realized that this is really not a sports storyline. This is really a character progression storyline. And this is really a arc that's necessary to progress Alita from what happened at the end of Alita Battle Angel the movie, or prior to the Motorball arc or the Hugo arc, the end of the Hugo arc in the storyline, or I would say the very end of the anime as well. She needed to have character progression to go from what she was right at that point of the end of the movie or the end of the anime or the end of the Hugo arc to where she needed to be later. And the Motorball arena was the environment to which she was able to grow. And the best way to explain this is to talk about the other movie. I said there were two movies that were related to this. The other movie I feel is very similar to the Motorball arc is the Rocky Balboa series, and not Rocky 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. I'm talking about the very first Rocky movie and the very last Rocky movie. And if you recall in those, as much as it was about boxing, it was also about character growth. Because Rocky, if you looked at the first movie, started out with a very somewhat dysfunctional person. A person who was really skilled in boxing and brawling, but never had the chance to show it in the professional ring. And because of that, the character was extremely resentful of life and kind of acted that way. And as we saw in the original Rocky, Rocky, once he got a chance to fight against Apollo Creed, and his coach, was worried and kind of warned him, this may not be a good idea because you might get destroyed and you might get your dream shattered. He kind of bit back and said, look, nobody, not a single person ever believed in me. Not a single person ever supported me. Not even you, coach. Not even you. And you could see the anger, the resentment that was in him at that time. Same with the very last Rocky Balboa movie, which I absolutely loved, although it didn't sell all that well, is that at that time, his wife had passed away. And the moment his wife had passed away, he started questioning what exactly was the purpose for his living. Why is he even living anymore? The most important thing in his life was taken away, and at that point, he was extremely resentful of life. He was trying to cover it up and trying to show that he was kind of comfortable with things going on, but you could see that really his wife's death left him as a hollow shell. And in both movies, it took the fight to bring him back to kind of a peace with himself. He needed that fight in the first movie to prove that he was, a contender. And in the last one, he needed that fight as a swan song to be able to come to terms with his sadness, his depression. And so what you remember is that although all the other Rocky movies were interesting in that he won and he overcame the his challenger, the first movie and the last movie were so special because he didn't win. He lost the match. But what was more important was it wasn't the challenger that was the most important obstacle. It was himself. And regardless of whether he won the match or he lost the match, it didn't matter because at the very end of the movies, he was at peace with himself. And that's why I really found the Rocky movies to be very interesting, because it wasn't just a movie about boxing. It was a movie about self-progression, about being able to come to terms with yourself through the actions that you did in the movie. And that comes to now, if we compare this to Alita Battle Angel Alita, or Battle Angel the OVA, that's exactly where we left Alita at the end of the movie, the end of the anime, or the end of the Hugo arc, right? She had lost her one love that she has ever since she regained her, woke up again. And she is now a hollow shell. That's what we find out once we go into the Motorball arc. And as much as there is an extreme amount of action and things go on, basically this is a character journey to somehow find peace within herself again after she lost it at the end of the Alita Battle Angel movie. And in the manga, this was represented or really clearly seen in two ways. One was the change in the persona of Alita, right? I mean, she went from a very positive, happy-looking girl to one who was extremely dark, right? I mean, the first time you see Alita turn around when Ido was looking for her, that stare was extremely cold. And the other, of course, is what you eventually find out, which is that she basically has left everything that she remembers, in the new environment that she experienced in, for example, the Alita Battle Angel movie, right? She's left Ido, she's left that neighborhood, she's dropped being a hunter-warrior, and she's basically now living in this Motorball world because of the fact that she can't live in that environment anymore. I mean, she won't even acknowledge Ido exists at that point. And that's basically, in the beginning, I thought maybe it was hate, but in some ways it is, but it's not a hate directed towards Ido personally, but it's a hate directed towards life. I think in some ways she hated life. She was angry at the situation. She was angry at the world. And in many ways, I feel that she was angry at herself. And coming to Motorball, since she is a warrior, was the one way that she could somewhat escape from everything by being able to go into these games and basically take her aggression and her hate out on the players. And by doing so, have some objective to go through, which is the championship in the comic. Which, in the comic, there is no, the final champion can go to Zalem, but it didn't matter in Alita's case. All she needed, she wanted to become champion because that was the only thing she could grasp onto, and everything else, she just felt kind of depressed or hating of herself and her life. Now, the other thing we know about the Motorball arc is that this is a very interesting arc. It's really, about two characters, not just Alita, but basically her challenger, or actually the champion, Jashugan, right? It's almost as much about Jashugan's story as it is about Alita. And this is a very interesting arc because considering that this is one of those, cloak and dagger, shoot 'em up, hero versus evil sort of, the usual environment that is somewhat the basis of the storyline. Jashugan, as much as he is the antagonist, is a character that you really like. I think I could speak for a lot of the readers of the comic that the readers liked Jashugan almost as much as Alita, possibly even more so during that arc. And the reason people like that is because he wasn't the typical stereotypical I am the champion and you are the contender and, look at me, I am great sort of person. He was actually not a sports champion as much as he was a spiritual warrior, at least from my perspective. he thought of these games as a battle. And just like Alita, he had a warrior spirit, and he felt that the winning wasn't important. It was the challenge in the battle that was important. And because of that, you started really respecting Jashugan just as much as you really liked Alita. And to some extent, since Alita was so negative during the first few chapters, you kind of steered towards Jashugan for those first few chapters in the Motorball arc. And eventually you find out exactly what's happening to Jashugan. And you find out that there's two objectives that happen in the Motorball arc. In Alita's case, it's a character growth that she needs to find herself again and overcome the barriers and the darkness in her soul. Not just from what happened with Hugo, but what happened, the darkness in her soul that occurred from the past. She doesn't know the past. She's trying to grasp for the past. All of that. She needs to overcome that entire barrier if she is to move on. In Jashugan's case, as we know, it's his swan song, right? He is a warrior. He is a true spirited warrior. But we realize and we find out through the story that he is dying. And just like a warrior, he is becoming extremely upset because of the fact that his body is becoming weaker. And he's flatlining. I'll talk about the flatlining later. But he's flatlining more and more. And because of that, it's affecting his battles, right? And so he knows that he's dying. And he wants to, just like a warrior, go out with a sword in his hand. But he feels that as he keeps on going and he gets weaker, this is not going to be the case. And that somewhat worries him, right? And so by seeing Alita, he gets elated because of the fact that here is a challenger worthy of his battles. And we know from a martial arts fighting skill point of view, at this point of Alita's skill, just the amount of Panzerkunst that she remembers at this point, Jashugan is a far superior fighter. His machine clutch martial arts is on par with Alita's Panzerkunst martial arts at this time, and in fact is superior, right? And so at this point, they make a really good matchup. And I loved how the story ended because of the fact that at the very end, of course, there's the final battle. And we know that Alita hits rock bottom eventually when she sees her manager die, trying to drag her back and demand that she continues on with the Motorball games because that's the only dream that he has. I won't go into the details of that. If anybody wants to learn about what the manager's backstory is with Jashugan, you should go read the comics. But he's had a history where he kind of resents his situation as well. And the only salvation for him as well is for somebody, in his team to beat Jashugan and to become the champion. It's become an obsession for him. And when Alita starts wondering whether her darkness is worthwhile and maybe she should move, go out of the games and go back, he demands that she stays. And during that argument, of course, he gets killed. Not by Alita, of course, but by a separate entity. And that's when you see Alita hit rock bottom and going, what the heck is going on? And it takes that final battle for both these characters to overcome their demons, right? I mean, in Alita's case, she needed that final battle to basically beat some sense into her and say, what is it that you actually value? Stop being an empty soul, because if you're going to be an empty soul and come into the challenge against somebody to the level of Jashugan, you're going to get your butt handed back to you. And that's what she finds out during her battle against Jashugan. And it's that battle that makes her realize what is important to her. What is it that she can cherish, What does she value? The same things that she told to Hugo when Hugo was trying to go to Zalem because he was obsessed with Zalem, and she was saying, what is it that you cherish, and why are you pretending like Zalem is your salvation? Alita needed also that same lesson given to her at this point, that this winning of the championship wasn't what she wanted. There were other much more important things to her. And once she got over that, that's when she became an extremely strong challenger against Jashugan. And in Jashugan's case, of course, he needed the ability to be able to go to the final battle. And of course, Ido gave him that capability. And with his final sacrifice of knowing that this is the best way to go out, he put his entire capabilities into the one battle. And in the very end, we found out, yes, just like Rocky, Alita loses the battle. But on a technicality, you could say she kind of won, because although Jashugan won the battle, he of course loses the game because of the fact that he dies after winning the battle. Now, I can't remember if he loses the game or not, but in any case, either way, it doesn't matter. He got the battle that he wanted, and with that, he was able to get the death that he was hoping for, a Viking's death, if he wanted to, with a sword in his hand. And Alita, of course, found her peace, was able to battle a proper opponent and become a proper opponent herself, and with that, was able to come to terms with herself, just like Rocky did. And that gave her the ability to return to Iron City, where she realized that everything she cherished was not up in Zalem, but down in Iron City. And what's great about that is not because she learned that and because she valued that, it became a perfect way to go into the Zapan arc. Because the Zapan arc, of course, is what you might call her version of a midlife crisis. Like, everything goes wrong after she found peace with herself. And this isn't about, how to inspire yourself sort of story. This is about, Battle Angel Alita has always been about trying to bring real world situations into this science fiction sort of storyline. That just because you find peace in yourself doesn't mean that life always goes well. And that's exactly what a midlife crisis is, right? Whether, it's because of a divorce, it's because of a layoff, it's because of a death of a friend or whatever. We go through life where we think that everything is okay, everything is wonderful, and then something turns us around and makes us question everything again. And this story gives those types of situations, with Alita being, of course, the receiver of all of that. And one of the reasons why the readers, of course, relate to Alita is not because she is a hero, not because she is a white knight. It's because she runs into these sorts of situations that we've all run into and goes, my gosh, I thought I had it bad, but look at this person, and in that sense, you kind of relate to her. You kind of sympathize with her a lot more than you would with your standard superhero that's out there. And so now we come to the potential sequel, right? And there's various key characteristics that I saw in the first movie, Alita Battle Angel, that makes me want to discuss things. So the first thing, why I mentioned that I don't think it's a good idea for the next movie to focus its entire movie length in the Motorball event is because, as much as I really like this Rocky Balboa sort of storyline, I don't think the mainstream audience will accept it and basically commend the movie for giving that storyline. The mainstream audience thinks of Alita Battle Angel as this, inspirational girl, superhero, Marvel Cinematic Universe in a different format sort of entity. And when they see a Rocky Balboa thing where she loses and it's all just focused to a sport, just like I felt like, why is this sports story there? I got a feeling at this level, that's what they'll say. And considering the fact that we're already hearing all these people say, oh yeah, Alita Battle Angel is a flop. Okay, it's made $350 million, but based upon blah, 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 it's China. It has a large original cost. It's not really well reputable by the critics. That's what makes it a flop no matter what happens. That sort of thing. It's getting a lot of negativity towards the movie. And so now if the mainstream audience goes back and says, now I want to see another superhero sort of movie and gets a Rocky Balboa sort of movie, as much as I love the artistic nature of the Rocky movies with regards to character growth and character revelation, that's not what the audience wants, and they'll go, this is a terrible movie. Where's the bad guy? Jashugan is a terrible bad guy. He's not evil enough. I want Darth Vader sort of evilness in my antagonist, just like, they said with the first movie where they said Vector was not evil enough, considering the fact that Vector's not supposed to be an evil antagonist, right? I mean, the whole point with Alita is this is not a good versus evil movie. This is a character journey movie. So not every movie has to have a really super evil entity. And so they may look at Jashugan and say, he's not evil enough. He's a terrible antagonist. And say it that way. So my feeling is unless they go straight into at least the Japan arc, and go through the Motorball arc, which I think they still will do because they ended the first movie with Motorball, that they better continue a little bit with Motorball in the second movie. They'll continue with that, but they won't or shouldn't do the entire movie about Motorball because of the fact that just steers it too far away from what the mainstream audience wants. I may want it, but at the same time, I also want to make sure that the second movie gets a lot more stronger approval from the audience than this first movie has. And I'm just worried that something as kind of philosophically complex as the Motorball arc will be kind of shunned by the audience because they say this isn't the usual good versus bad, white knight versus evil superhero sort of movie trope. And they'll shoot it down because of that. Now, with respect to the movie, there was a couple of things that I think that they did really well towards Motorball, and there was a couple of things that I question a lot. And the thing I think they did really well was the setup to the next Motorball arc at the end of the Alita Battle Angel series. I mean, I thought for a while that maybe that the final champion being able to go to Zalem was not a really good thing, but later on I realized that no, that's perfect. It's a perfect thing to have if they're going to go towards that dark character Alita that they did in the very beginning of the Motorball arc in the source material. The nice thing about this is it's not just about Alita running away from the most recent events due to the Hugo arc, but it's also that she gains an obsession to want to go to Zalem. There's 3 reasons now that she wants to go to Zalem. First is because that was Hugo's dream, and so she wants to fulfill Hugo's dream for Hugo. Second is because she has heard that she is from Zalem, and so she wants to see if she could go to Zalem to learn about her past. And third is, of course, to confront Nova. That is the biggest reason. She wants to go there to kick Nova's butt. Yeah. And so those 3 by itself becomes an obsession to her. It's her goal. It's her life. And it really takes her down a bad path, just the way it did in the comic. It starts alienating her from everybody else. Not in the way of, where is Alita as it was in the comic, but in the way that a lot of people start worrying about her because she starts obsessing and just thinking only about the championship. That's all she ever thinks about. She throws away her Hunter Warrior status, which more or less may be okay, but then she also stops even talking to people at home initially with Ido. Maybe that's something that can happen, outside of the movie, but she's already distanced herself from Ido, and she's distanced herself from some of the friends that she made, such as Koyomi. It may be something where Koyomi's worried about her and saying, you gotta stop obsessing over this, you gotta get some rest. She turns around and just slaps Koyomi psychologically by saying, "Wow, and I thought you were Hugo's friend. How dare you tell me to rest when my vision for doing this is for Hugo? I guess you weren't that much of a friend to him at all," which of course makes Koyomi slap Alita in the face and probably hurt her hand doing so. But that's the sort of thing that I would expect. This obsession, this one focus, as you often see in obsessive compulsive people, is what's bringing her down. And that would be perfect. Now, of course, the manager helps stoke that because he's also wanting his obsessive compulsiveness. And of course, it takes Jashugan in this case to bring her back to light, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so I think it's really set up well for the Motorball arc if they want to go down the Motorball arc. The difficulty is, of course, because it's a trilogy now, they can't really spend a lot of time focusing on it. And as I mentioned, if they do, they may lose the audience, and so they can't afford to focus on it. But, within a short amount of time, they need to resolve this darkness. Now, the other difficulty I had was the character of Jashugan, the way it was represented in the first movie. I really could not connect with the Jashugan that was in the movie. Now, I will be neutral with regards to the portrayal by Jai Courtney. I'm not sure if he could portray Jashugan well, in the sense that he tends to have a very emotionless sort of personality. And as much as Jashugan is a warrior, there's a difference between being a spirited warrior, a spiritual warrior, and having no emotion. He's not a robot, right? And so the fine line between being able to hide heart, the softness of a soul, because you are a spiritual warrior, versus not showing emotion, is something that only a few actors can do. And I'm sure hoping that Jai Courtney can come up to par with the requirements, But the other thing is that just as you can see, Jashugan, who's on the right side of my screen here, when I thought of Jashugan from the comic, and this is just me biased from reading the comic, if you go in not knowing, then you probably wouldn't know about this, but just seeing his character, I've always thought of him as being something like a Native American kind of characteristic, because of the fact that he's a spiritual warrior. And I always associated him with something like the Apache or the Cherokee, in that he has this warrior code of being hard, but at the same time being, ethically proper, And so that was the thing that I saw. And when I saw how Jai Courtney looked, not that it is Jai Courtney, but how he looked, he didn't remind me of a spiritual warrior. He reminded me of this Formula One racer millionaire who playboy sort of dude, And maybe that was me. Maybe it's just everybody else saw the spiritual hardline warrior in him. But I felt more that he was like this Formula One successful racer champion than he was Jashugan. And so I'm hoping, again, that this gets resolved. And of course, if it's going to be Jai Courtney, then you could think of other spiritual warrior races in history, right? The Spartans were that way. The Vikings were that way. The Celtics were that way. I'm hoping that he studies those and looks at various previous movies that basically had Vikings or Celtics or Spartans in there, and get that persona right for this particular role that he's going to be playing if, Motorball comes out in the sequel. The other thing I had an issue with is just how weak Jashugan looked in battle in the Motorball game. I don't know about you, but he looked seriously flawed. I mean, people say, oh yeah, Jashugan is the highest contender to be final champion. No, in the comic, he was leagues better than anybody else. As we know, the only thing that kept him back was that he would flatline constantly during the game. And when I mean flatline, his brain will literally shut down and he will become completely paralyzed. He will smash into the wall and he would basically, lose the match. And that just aggravated him to death. But when he was, working, running properly, he wiped the floor with every other every other contender, right? I mean, if you recall, even in the final championship against Alita and the other very, very powerful elite players such as, Ajikari or Zafal Takie, he literally destroyed every other player with the exception of Alita within like 30 seconds. All 5 players were destroyed. They weren't beaten. They were literally destroyed, smashed to pieces by his martial arts. That's how strong this guy is. Now, of course, even when Alita was able to come to terms with herself and be able to stably use her Panzerkunst at the levels that she knew of Panzerkunst at that time, Jashugan still beat her. And that's how powerful he is. And then you see this, where he was just getting beaten easily in the first movie. Now they can change the movie such that, maybe it's not a flat line and that he is getting weaker and weaker progressively and that's aggravating him. And if that's the case, I'm fine with that. But they better be able to explain why somebody of that caliber was so weak in the games. He is supposed to be leagues above even Alita at this point, right? And so, yeah, that just didn't make any sense. And of course, the biggest difficulty will be the time, right? It's now constrained to a short period of time to be able to do this. So my feeling is that somewhere along the way, Alita and Jashugan have to have a one-on-one kind of heart-to-heart talk. Maybe that's it. Or maybe he has it with Ido or somebody. But somewhere along the way, the audience, the movie audience, needs to realize that Jashugan is dying. And he somehow needs to be able to express to Alita that she, from his perspective, she is the only solution. She's the only way he could go out the way he wants to in a Viking manner, with a proper battle. But the Alita that he sees right now is just disappointing him because she is so overly compulsively obsessed with just winning rather than battling. And somehow he needs to be able to communicate that so that becomes somewhat a wake-up call for Alita. That she's obsessed. Of course, somewhere along the way, Jashugan just basically puts her down verbally, that she is just not in her place. And then, it makes her think a little bit and maybe consider maybe she should get out of the games. That makes the manager upset, and then it goes through that whole thing. And maybe that can be done quickly, but it can't be done subtly the way it was in the comic because they don't have time to do that. Just like with the first movie, they're going to have to be in your face. This is how the situation is. This is the the Motorball plot, and I'm dying, she's upset, and we're gonna verbally say that so that if anybody doesn't get it, they'll get it by this heart-to-heart talk, and then we'll go out and do everything fine. And then at the very end, of course, Alita realizes what she values. She basically thanks spiritually Jashugan for bringing her back to her place, And of course, at the very end, end of this part of the movie, she goes back to Iron City. At least that's what I feel may be a way of being able to still bring out the characteristics, the value of the Motorball arc while being constrained to the certain amount of time that it has. So I am going to be watching Jai Courtney a lot because his role is going to be crucial. And I'm also going to be seeing whether Robert Rodriguez understands this, that this is not a sports championship. Let's let Alita win and overcome Jashugan from a sports point of view, but this is actually a spiritual growth phase for Alita. And Alita better lose this final session, because that's the only way you could really give closure to both Jashugan's objective and Alita's objective. If she wins the way Rocky won in 2, 3, or 4, then that basically, for me, will at least ruin the entire Motorball arc. So anyway, that's about it for me anyway. That's why I really value the Motorball arc in this Battle Angel Alita storyline. I apologize if I put too much of a spoiler for anybody. I apologize for taking this long again, and thank everybody for watching up to this point. I'll continue with the things. There's still a lot of things to talk about. I think in the next one, I think I want to talk about Mars, or the United Republic of Mars, and the things I have with that. Either that or the Fall. Either that or maybe Panzerkunst. I'll have to think about it. Maybe you could tell me which one. But I really do want to talk about Mars a little bit in the next episode. Okay, well, thank you very much anyway. And we'll continue on with this. If you have any comments, please post them in the comment section below, because your comments are always great. And let's keep on going, and let's keep our fingers crossed for a sequel. And if there is a sequel, a really, really good Motorball segment of that sequel. Okay, so Jaya, nice day, everyone.